So hi, Bethany. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Ricky. It's good to be here. I'm glad to be back.
So today we're going to explore Plato's theory of form, and we're going to use that as a starting point and build upon that and see where it leads. Should we introduce like a kind of overview of that before we begin? It's probably the best.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to start.
Okay, so to my understanding, the theory of form is an idea from Plato that says that behind the physical realm, there's an essence of form and ideas from which the physical emerges. And within that, there's a perfect form for different things such as objects, concepts, even emotional states or virtues. And it's a realm that is unseen, but in which the physical interacts with. And within that, there's a process of understanding how to integrate that realm into the physical. So it's almost like a baseline foundational dimension of being from which the world that we see and perceive with our senses emerges. Does that sound like a like a good overview?
Yeah, it does. And it always amazes me that, Plato, like people from a long time ago come up with these ideas, but that they're still very relevant to many different theories. I have a few in mind, but to start, I think that's a really good contextualization of what this is, what Plato's world of form or ideas is.
I'm really keen as well, and I think something we share is like, how do you? It's deeply philosophical, but there are also practical ways to understand, and I'd love to try and explore that as well. Like, how do we bridge that as just a philosophy, this a form of entertainment, with maybe a more direct or immersive experience? Like, how you would apply that to your life, or how that could be used as inspiration, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think the practical is really important, because otherwise this term of like navel gazing comes to me a lot of, because I'm in the field of consciousness studies and academia, and we often contemplate these really deep topics and we talk about them forever, and then we forget about the practical point of like, how does this actually apply in my life?
Yeah, that's it. And I think you can really kind of have a strong distinction between never kind of crossing that bridge and applying it. The obvious one that comes to mind is Carl Jung's theory of archetypes, the kind of psychic essence of form that emerges in the psyche through emotional states, through dialogue from the unconscious. So we can maybe explore that, this idea of an essential foundation to reality, and how that also affects the human, how it affects our subjective reality.
Yeah, that's Jung was one of the first people who came to mind when I was thinking about this topic as well, of this theory of archetypes, and then how it informs our lives. And people go into Jungian therapy for years, to analyzing their dreams and all sorts of things to see how this perhaps non-physical reality is coming through us. And I think, for me at least, it's helpful to think of the human, like us, as the bridge. Like the body is like the bridge between this perhaps world of ideas and this physical reality. And we as humans are perhaps in a unique position that we can metacognate on this whole thing. Like we can think about the fact that we're thinking and that we're participating in this. And that puts us in a really unique position of, for example, like, my interest in synchronicity, noticing these types of, according to Jung, the synchronicities emerge when a certain archetype gets constellated or activated. And then the physical and mental almost merge for a moment. The mental, or the world of ideas, comes into physical form. And we experience this connection in a way between mind and matter. And I think that paying attention, at least to synchronicities in our lives, is a way to get a little bit more practical with some of these ideas.
That's I love that. This humans as being multidimensional, and that bridge of, as you say, like we can reflect, we can metacognate, we can step almost outside of ourselves and understand, like, I have this physical body, but I have consciousness as well. And does that access, like, are there different parts of me that access different dimensions? Maybe that's something to unpack a little, is the idea that although we're physical beings, we also have like the imaginal realm, and that we see reality, or a fixed reality, but we have the ability to kind of perceive consciousness, or perceive with consciousness, depending on how you look at it. And that's almost like the unifying factor between what you talk to is synchronicity, when like thoughts, feelings, ideas, dreams, they all kind of correlate with the physical. That's not a question, is it?
No, but I
said
actually
that
have
like
some
a question.
thoughts.
Yeah, go. So like my brain's already exploding with ideas, so I think we just build on. Yeah.
Exactly. No, every time you share something, I have something on my mind that
Yeah.
kind of can perhaps relate to it, because definitely I think that, like I was saying, that humans are this bridge, and that it's an important, a lot of spirituality talks about like going up and out, like, which is important in many ways, going up into almost that realm, that non-physical, imaginal world of ideas, whatever you want to call it. But we also need to go down and in and be in the body as well, and kind of go back and forth between, which is where I think this bridge becomes really important. And especially with this imaginal realm, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's some academics, I've read a few academic papers on suggesting that the imaginal world is real in its own way. It has its own actual ontological status, if you will, that it is a legitimate form of reality. It's just not the same form of reality as this physical matter that we see around us. Now, the part of me that was trained as a mainstream materialist scientist is like, what? No, imagination isn't real. Like, that's all in your head. It's not real. But then, many physicists, if you ask them about it, will admit that they find matter quite mysterious as well. This physical matter, that it's quite mysterious as well. And so who's to say that the imaginal realm isn't real in some sort of way that is just slightly different than this physical reality that we see around us, and that perhaps at times the wires get crossed, or that, however you want to think of it, and there's some little blip in the matrix. Sorry, I just saw the most recent Matrix movie, but
relevant. It's always ever relevant, the Matrix.
Yeah. So there's like a blip in the matrix that pops that imaginal world into our physical world for a moment, where we're like, wow.
Yeah. I fully agree with that line of thinking. And it's like the shamanic realm almost. There's the dimension of the imaginal. And when we link that, and I'm aware that I'm going to go off on many tangents as I explore this, but I was thinking, so I'll read out. So some of the types of form, I think I may have introduced it, but Plato says that there's like phenomena, objects, and concepts. So like there's almost the perfect essence of a tree, and we understand all trees, like we can categorize trees by this perfect fundamental form. The same with virtues such as love and beauty and wisdom. They're different, but from that emergent world of ideas, they still exist as a kind of blueprint, right? And the same with concepts. And the reason that I'm going back to this is that it's as if there's also like a perfect idea or a perfect form of story or unfolding, in which we would call myth. And something that it took me a really long time to actually get this idea of myth, or the mythical, interacting with our lives. Like how does the hero's journey, for example, like how does that actually apply to my life? And I feel like this imaginal realm, which is linked to this idea, of the underlying essence, also has archetypal elements of unfolding, of mythical what we call storylines, that we can then interact with in a way. And as Jung looks at like archetypes, we interact with not only them as a fundamental psychic energy, but it's same with synchronicity. There's an unfolding element, and this idea as well with Plato, it's like outside of time and space. So I wonder if this imaginal realm has this kind of overarching view of matter, and the interactions are, past, present, and future. They kind of coexist. It's like this mythical imaginal dimension is interacting from a non-local, non-material perspective. Nice.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. I mean, many of the talks that I've been attending lately on consciousness and the nature of reality, and these talks, there are often conferences that include philosophers, physicists, people who study psychology, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the conclusions that keeps kind of popping up in these conferences is that time is like something that we really haven't quite understood or figured out yet, and that there's some code that needs to get cracked there, and that then we will start to maybe understand reality a little bit better, especially this idea, like you're saying, of perhaps some aspect of reality that is not time bound in the way that we are. We experience, and it reminds me of what you're saying too with narrative and myth. Narrative and myth happen in a sequence over a time, in linear time, the way that we experience it, but that perhaps there is some either intelligence or information or realm or whatever you want to call it that is outside of that, but yet contributes to it. And we all co-create within it in some way that we don't fully understand, but that contributes somehow to a greater whole that we also do not yet understand.
Yeah. This idea, like the idea of holism, and like they're different dimensions, and there are smaller parts that inform the whole, and this interactive element is really vital to that kind of understanding. I want to drop in this like non-dual perspective of awareness being outside of space and time as well, and pure awareness, this idea of pure consciousness, residing outside of content. And the reason I say that is in a lot of Eastern traditions, such as Advaita Vedanta, they would say that even the imaginal is content. And there's like this, I guess like a superior awareness, or like a supreme awareness that all content can be observed. And through that, you see the material, you see the imaginal and the emotional. And I'm going back to this idea of humans being a bridge. I had a conversation the other day. I say I found myself talking because I did. That happens a lot. I'm like, what am I saying? I'm not even aware of what I'm saying. And it was on this idea of us, humans being multidimensional beings. And this idea of like awareness being intertwined with, but also distinct from matter, and like the imaginal realm and the mental realm. We know these exist subjectively, and there's growing evidence in scientific understanding that a lot of theories around the universe being sentient or like a mind, and these kind of theories. It's as if these dimensions, so right, all right, to get to the point, the question for me is, if we are perceiving this as the bridge, does it mean that before human it didn't exist? And my understanding or intuition around this is that it did exist before. Thought existed before human. The imaginal existed before human. And we've evolved in, one of the terms is in the image of God. And it's almost like we've evolved to perceive these dimensions of reality. And something that Plato talks to is, when you connect to this, when you connect to like a closer, or you have a closer connection to this essence, it's as if it's known. It's like there's an element of it, the soul stirs, and it's like, oh, there's something in this. This is a kind of knowledge that feels more like a recollection. There are a lot of different concepts in there that I'm just going to leave you with to see where that leads.
Yeah, no, there's so much there. I mean, this aspect of pure consciousness or pure awareness is definitely an intriguing one. And there's, again, one of the themes that I'm seeing come up in many of these conferences on consciousness that I'm attending is this idea. It's not a new idea either, but it seems to be just kind of repeating and coming through a variety of different disciplines, whether it's physics or psychology or whatever, which is this idea of humans existing in order for the universe or God or whatever you want to call it to become conscious of itself. So that our purpose as this bridge is to bring reflective self-awareness into the universe in some way, so that perhaps there is and was at some point, even before humans, some pure contentless awareness that wanted to be aware of itself in some way. And so our universe as we know it has evolved into this immensely creative journey for a variety, not just humans, but all sorts of species of animals and like the variety of plants and everything that exist. I like to think of the universal, I don't know what you would call it, mind or whatever, or consciousness as like the best artist ever, like the most creative person of all time that's just constantly creating. It just keeps going and going and going, which is, I think, a really beautiful way to think of it, again, as us humans being this co-creative bridge. And that some are suggesting that the actual purpose of life is simply to just be aware of life. That's it. To be that conscious awareness, the end. Because when you become that conscious awareness, you develop a certain reverence for all of life as well, to care for the earth. And there's various outcomes of that are often beneficial to this physical reality that we live in.
Yeah, I find that a lot of the discussion, or even when you're trying to, because you, for me, like the experience of awareness is essential. And I use that word in multiple meanings, but like for me, a meditation practice where I can observe and explore that. I feel that, talking for me, like me personally, at times I felt that awareness just is awareness, right? It's just like, you're just aware of things, you know, that's what it is. But it's as if, and you point to this, there's an inbuilt intelligence with pure awareness, this kind of ineffable, really incomprehensible quality that all these sages and yogis talk to. It's not only intelligent, it contains qualities that are essential, such as compassion and love and wisdom. And as you say, like, it's almost like if you can be with that, those qualities can start to saturate your own being through connection to what does feel a much more fundamental aspect of being, which is beyond, it's beyond thinking, feeling, sensing, and these other kind of dimensions.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that when you're speaking there, it's reminding me of this aspect you brought up a moment ago about remembrance, because many, mystics, sages, regular everyday people who have touched in a little bit, like who have had a mystical experience of some sort, or even a brief moment of touching into this sense of pure awareness or pure consciousness, they often say that it's very difficult to describe what this is like. But one theme I've noticed come up is people will often describe it as feeling like a remembering, like, oh, no, I knew this, I know this. This is actually a remembering of what I am, who I am, what I'm doing here, what my purpose is. And I think of it kind of in the same way that, most of us, we go to sleep at night and maybe we'll dream. And then we wake up in the morning, and then there's this brief moment where we suddenly, when we wake up in the morning, we remember, like, oh, I'm here, I'm so-and-so, I'm Bethany, this is what I have to do today. And it's just a natural feeling of remembering of, okay, this is me in this body, this is my day. And this idea that awakening experiences or mystical experiences are like an awakening from this dream, this dream that we're in right now, where suddenly you wake up for either a little bit or permanently. People experience it in different ways. And you're like, oh, I remember, this is what I am. That other thing is really fun and interesting, but it's a bit of a dream or like a shadow of the real thing, kind of like Plato's theories speak to as well.
Yeah, this so it's like the allegory of the cave, right? Like that we often perceive the shadow of the perfect form and mistake it for the real thing, and our duty is to turn our attention to the essence and to explore that. This as you talk through that, I'm reminded as well that Plato is part of his description is that the soul for him is in that realm before it becomes part of the body, or before it finds form. And that we, in these experiences, it's like our soul knows, and we reconnect to this essence because we've known it. So it's exactly that, this idea of this idea of forgetting and remembrance is so integral to so many different, I'll call them like metaphysical, it's just life in general. I've been thinking about this with intention. When you set an intention, and also with synchronicity, I'll come back to that. But when you set an intention, it's not like setting a goal where you might just say, okay, this week I have the intention of practicing compassion. Like when I feel challenged, I want to practice compassion towards myself and to people that I meet. In my experience, every time I do that, I might journal and then I forget. And this goes back to the nature of time as well, because I forget, and experiences, it's almost like they magnetize towards me, have experiences. And then I remember that I set an intention, and it's in this like kind of completing that loop that then all the events that occurred between setting the intention and this point of recollection make sense based on the original intention. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. It makes me think of, like you were speaking to before, even this narrative. Like a narrative is often a cycle or a loop of some sort, that if there's some aspect of reality that functions in this way, it will bring us back and help us remember. Like one of my teachers often talked about how there's this dance between forgetting and remembering, and it's actually all part of being human. There are some enlightened beings who just reach some state where they're in just constant, pure, contentless awareness or consciousness. But for most of us, that's not the reality. For most of us, it is this dance between forgetting and remembering and forgetting. It makes me think of even when you're meditating, like if you practice any form of mindfulness meditation, the whole point is you're bringing your attention back over and over and over again, and then you forget, and then you come back. So I think it's for some mysterious and sometimes annoying reason, our experience of as humans, that we are constantly forgetting about everything, about just the beauty of this life, this universe. And it even makes me think of, there's some theorists, like there's a theorist, Donald Hoffman, I believe he's within the field of psychology, who has this theory of consciousness, and he's used evolutionary theory and mathematical modeling to get to this, that this physical world we see around us is a type of interface that is hiding the true nature of reality from us, and we don't know what actual reality is. So it made me think of, like, when you see a tree, it's a tree in this physical world the way we see it, but there is some form, like in Plato's terms, or idea of like a real true tree that at least with our current senses in their normal functioning don't access. But every once in a while we maybe dip into it.
I'm thinking of the tree of life, and as I think of that, I also I'm thinking about, because I dream a lot about trees. It's a lot more exciting than it sounds, just saying that.
No, I love trees. I have a love affair with trees as well. So I hear you.
Yeah, right. Like this was one of a really interesting experience in my awakening, was becoming aware of the sentience of trees. And as this theme or this story or this myth was unfolding in my subjective reality, I was having so many really cool dreams about trees. But the relevance of that was that one in particular, I was by a tree, but it was like 1,000 times bigger than any tree I've ever seen. And it almost did have that quality of like, this could be, like, as you say, like there's an essence, and that essence is something we recognize and we can connect to. I'm going to go off on another tangent because it makes me think of metaphor. And this is something that I've thought about quite a lot, like this idea of why do we often talk or explain in metaphor? And it's as if metaphor is actually describing some kind of reality. And the reason I say that is, like, the essence of a tree is something that we can connect to. And like if I say to you, like, you try and be tree-like, like if you say that to someone, you'd be, oh, I'd be grounded, I'll be firm. And there's like an essence of metaphor. And I think of how we use the weather to describe emotions as well. It's like the movement of the weather. And again, coming back to this idea of movement maybe being essential, and how things coalesce and interact, it makes perfect sense to use weather metaphors to describe emotion. So I wonder if, like, there's a interconnected essence between we're all part of the earth, and we can kind of connect to the essence of everything on earth because it's actually also part of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the whole thing of us being made of stardust anyway, like that we're all actually part of, there's nothing new in the universe in a sense. We're all part of something that was at one time one thing. And then when you speak of metaphor, it kind of makes me laugh because, again, this traditional mainstream materialist scientist in me, whenever at first I would come across articles about metaphor, I'm like, what is this? This is just some like person, again, navel gazing, like going off about, oh, the metaphor of this and that. But as I've delved more into this and I've listened to more talks by people from the humanities, for example, there is this essence, this quality of metaphor that is really important. It's important to how we perceive and experience life and how we give our lives meaning as well. And you're right. Like, I think that we connect to metaphor so easily because it helps us experience what we already are, which is this, all of this, in a very interconnected way. Yeah.
And I wonder if that's also like a form of remembering. You know, we're so disconnected from nature that, well, actually, this is going back to or linking to the different elements from a lot of like Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, like the different elements of being, like earth, water, air, fire, and how we kind of, you know, our digestive system is linked to fire, and all of these different they appear to be essential aspects of nature that also make up not only the physical body, but the psychology, the subjective experience. And it's around that patternicity. I love that word, patternicity. It's around that patternicity that like psychic patterns can unfold. This is maybe something because, you know, this is an area of expertise that you have. And maybe this is something we can look at, the link between patternicity, just so I get to say that word again, and and the subjective psychological experience, that, like, how they relate almost, because I feel that it can be hard to comprehend, but we all do it maybe subconsciously in a way.
Yeah, no, I've become very interested in like what you're saying. It's making me think of this concept within many mystical traditions of as above, so below, that these patterns repeat at multiple levels, multiple dimensions, whatever you want to call it, that there's certain patterns to the earth, to the universe. I mean, if you've seen these pictures that have been going around online about like these close-ups of a cell that looks very, very similar to the universe itself, and also looks very similar to close-ups of, you know, how our neural networks work in the brain. And so this idea that there's some sort of patterning going on at multiple levels that we again dip into every once in a while. And synchronicities are kind of an example of that you hook into some kind of pattern that's happening, and that ends up evolving into something meaningful for you as well. Like, I definitely agree with you too about the elements that, like, and it's part of this, that the elements are present at all levels in some way. Like Ayurveda, you know, speaks to this quite a bit as well. But yeah, our constitutions can be a certain, you know, earth, air, fire, water aspect. The elements exist here around us, and perhaps at some level at a broader scale as well. There are these certain fundamental aspects, including myth, you know, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, or the archetypes. Like, they are these fundamental patterns, if you will, that occur in perhaps some other realm, and also in our own realm and the physical world around us.
Oh, I love this. Yeah, I love this line of thinking. It's making me think like what you say with the universe and the as above, so below. It's like this idea of the fractal. What am I thinking of? I like fractal.
Like fractal geometry.
Yeah, like sacred geometry is a great example. Like we have, say, the Fibonacci sequence that unfolds in nature, and there are areas, say, in the human brain that if you look at the brain, I think Joe Dispenza looked at this, like the pineal gland is like right at the midpoint of the golden ratio. When you look at the infrastructure, say, in our lungs, that the infrastructure of our lungs kind of matches trees. And when you think of that symbiotic relationship that we have with, we're alive because of trees and this relationship. But what I really like that you've brought in is the universal, because if there is an essential, and I feel like this idea of almost the earthly and like nature, like Mother Nature and the earthly, but then the universal, there are a lot of examples of that, the correlation between the way things form to scale all the way down and all the way up. And it's like an emergent quality. And Plato speaks to this, I think, like there's an emergent quality, that you have the essential, and from the essential things emerge. And in our reality, like that evolves in complexity. So we could say like this idea of evolution, being the universe wanting to know itself, we evolved into complexity from like a single cell, or like even from an atom into a cell, and you kind of keep increasing in complexity. So there is a universal. I think there was a study from, I want to say last year, that linked the synapses in the brain and the infrastructure of neurons with the universe, the cosmos itself. If you've seen this, I can't remember the
exact one of these pictures, where the pictures were so similar between what our neural networks look like and actually what the intergalactic photography looks like. It's fascinating. And it makes me think too of, I think that within all of this, we would be remiss to not mention David Bohm's theories, because he has this whole theory of the implicate and explicate order. So Bohm was a physicist, and this idea that there is this implicate order, which we might also consider as Plato's world of ideas, or the Jungian archetypes to some extent, this implicate order, and that the physical world unfolds from that. And the physical world that we see. And so it just makes me think of, with all these levels, with the sacred geometry that you're mentioning as well, like how high does it go? Like what is up there in the universe that we're not aware of, that is involved in our experience somehow. Like it just, you know, it blows my mind in some way. But there are many different theorists who and philosophers and physicists who have put forth this idea of some fundamental oneness or reality from which this reality that we experience emerges.
Yeah. I'm sure I recently watched a documentary on David Bohm, Infinite Potential. I'm not sure if you've seen it. Have you seen it? Yeah,
yes.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
I really, actually, I was fascinated to discover that he's done a lot of work on dialogue as well. And it's related to like a book I'm working on now, between almost like how do you dialogue between the quantum worldview and the material worldview? Like, what if these two worlds were speaking in dialogue, how would they interact? But this, I'm losing my thread now because now I'm thinking about the book.
It's okay. It's an opportunity to promote your upcoming
promote my book. David Bohm is relevant. That's what I was thinking of. So one thing, like with my awakening, like however I want to call it, an awakening experience that really got me questioning what is the worldview that I inherited, and why is it that so many of my experiences don't fit this worldview, this material worldview, where like the material is the only aspect of being. And it was from that I started researching. I know we've spoken about research before, and the like sacred element of that, and something that can often feel guided. So like it's almost like the like information or knowledge itself is waiting to be remembered. Like there's that kind of dimension. But the point being with that is that I've lost my thread again, because now I'm trying like damn it, what was I going to say? Information, remembering information, right? Yeah, research. So getting back to the point, when I was looking into okay, is there a different map to reality that would better explain my experience? That was when I really got into researching quantum physics. And you know, even just seeing the way that the early pioneers of quantum physics speak about that dimension, it's incredibly mystical. And as you point to, you know, it's almost impossible to avoid seeing it as a form of oneness and interconnection. And when you look at things like quantum entanglement, non-locality, and the way that this implicate order is so, it seems to not be compatible with the material, but it's also like the implicate interacts, as you mentioned earlier, with synchronicity, or like things seem to appear into the ordinary view that we have from the implicate. Maybe that's something you could talk to before I lose my thread again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I mean, I'm not a physicist. And so for me, but I'm so fascinated by physics. And so I try my best to basically, like what you were just saying, to understand the concepts and to get curious about it. Like, because people will often say, okay, well, the quantum world is different from the larger physical world that we're involved in. They're two totally different things. So you can't make all these broad conclusions from quantum physics about this world that we experience. But there's this part of me that's like, okay, I can understand that from one perspective, but also still you're looking at this physical world, or you're at least mathematically probing. And not only mathematically, there's experimental evidence of things like entanglement as well, that suggests that this physical world that we experience is operating at some level in that way. So where does it switch, where something is quantum and suddenly, nope, now it's not now? And many will say that, well, it switches when there's an observer. It's the observer. And again, I'm not a physicist, so, you know, this might not be entirely correct, but I do really think that there is such an important element of awareness, like what we've been talking about, awareness. Something happens, things coalesce or shift at the quantum level when there's someone there to experience it, or
Mm-hmm.
to see it or to observe it. And some suggest that this underlying aspect that we've been talking about, some people also call it presence, that
Mm-hmm.
that's all it is. It's just presence,
Mm-hmm.
which hints at a very deep level of relationality. Like some suggest that relationality is actually like an inherent component of the universe. And so when you bring up dialogue, I find it really interesting because dialogue is a form of relating, in a way, but relationality of like the ways that we interact, the ways that we just perceive everything is in some way an essential component of what creates this physical reality.
Yeah, that's making me think of like I think on some level, so for me, like my interest is similar to you, right? It's like, well, is there a different explanation? Like if I'm piecing together and I'm trusting my subjective experience, we're not taught to do that really in the Western world, but if I'm trusting my subjective experience and there are so many different experiences or phenomena or intuitions or instincts that point to something, my original kind of exploration was, is there any alternative scientific explanation that would at least make this possible, that would at least make it possible? And I think that the answer is a resounding yes. Like as far as I can tell, it's a resounding yes. We don't quite understand the way that the quantum and the physical relates, or at least the traditional physics, and like how you model. I wonder if actually different models, you're talking about scale, if different models apply to different scales, but there is on some level, as that complexity kind of increases, there is still an inherent aspect that is quantum. I think I spoke to Steve Taylor. I know you know Steve. I spoke to him and I read his book, Spiritual Science, and in that he explores like quantum biology. And because it doesn't seem that it's fully integrated into mainstream science, in the sense we've not really explored it enough. And it does seem like the more we explore that, the more questions come up of, there's something he mentions about the way that birds migrate could be to do with a quantum phenomena. So I wonder that as well, if it's actually a lack of genuine, well-funded study into how the quantum relates to the Newtonian kind of worldview. And Newton was an alchemist and a mystic as well, which I love.
Exactly.
The irony of
I know.
that.
There's this whole undercurrent of, and that's why I get the sense, and it might not happen in my lifetime, but I do get the sense that we are getting closer and closer to some sort of a tipping point where, because it's true, I agree with you that this kind of disconnect between the quantum and this physical world, it's like, well, haven't physicists been working on this for decades now? Like, why haven't we figured anything out? Why isn't this breaking through? And many of the articles that I read will say exactly what you've said, that quantum physics at least provides a scenario within which things like psi phenomena, psychic abilities, various experiences are potentially possible. It's not 100% obviously, but it provides a framework within which these things might be possible. And I think it's going to be a matter of science continuing to shift, and perhaps us getting even more curious about what matter actually is.
Yeah.
Because materialist science, as you're saying, that's the whole point, is that, okay, this is real. This matter is real. This is the only reality. If we just study this enough, we'll figure it out. So I think there's something here around getting deeper and deeper into what matter is. And we've tried that, and it usually takes you into the quantum world in some way. And what time is, what time really is. And those two things together, I think, are going to lead to some sort of a shift. It might not be for like 100 or 200 more years. It might be in 10 years. I really don't know, but I do sense that some sort of a shift is brewing and developing.
Yeah, me too. I feel it in the relationship as well, being, so for me, like, and this could be wildly inaccurate, so that's a disclaimer as I share this, but I understand that we also in our consciousness have like a quantum element, and it's as if this kind of more rational minded intellectual, like coming from the age of enlightenment and this movement of scientific method and reason, it's all well and good and it's got its purpose, but we're at a point where that imbalance, I feel, is starting to shift, and the awareness that, at least on a wider scale, at my understanding, that seems to be shifting. But then in that shifting, there's a real phase of uncertainty, because the quantum is a lot more uncertain, it's a lot more unpredictable. And there's almost, and I think Steve talks about this in the book as well, there's almost a reassurance that can come from the material worldview, because it does feel like we've got complete dominion over nature. We will know everything at one point. And it's like the quantum has that quality of mystery that can be completely inspirational or mildly terrifying. And I think my perspective on that is that it does depend a lot on a spiritual practice that someone has. If you can be with uncertainty, you can kind of have a benevolent contact with the transcendental. Yeah, I'm not sure what point I'm trying to make with that, other than
no, I mean, I would agree with you on that. I think there's also something really key in this ability to be with uncertainty and be with ambiguity and hold paradox that we're really not good at in modern, I would say, like Western industrial materialist societies. We want certainty, we want a linear path, we want things to progress in a certain way. And it's actually often when we open up to the unknown, and perhaps this is a way that we sort of tap into the quantum, who knows, and invoke synchronicity and all of that, is we actually kind of surrender and let go a little bit and say like, okay, I don't know what this life is. I don't know how to live. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know what my path is. And then suddenly, like beep, 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 like things, of course, you might go through a dark night of the soul in the process. That's often what happens. But then also certain things will just start to come into place because perhaps we open ourselves up to that paradox and that mystery in a way. And many wisdom traditions, like Zen koans as well, like that's the point of them, is to just there's no answer. So to get you more comfortable with uncertainty, I feel is important. There seems to be I feel it or sense it as some aspect of the universe or intelligence or whatever we want to call it that is like playful and kind of trickster, like the Jungian archetype of the trickster, and also that like we're trying too hard, we're thinking too much about it, that it's actually really simple. And it gets back to this idea when you talk about the remembering, it's like it's actually just very simple. Awareness, the end, or just uncertainty, the end. Because in awareness, you're just aware, you're not trying to figure anything out or have a path or be linear in any kind of way. And there's this like kind of humor and this grand tricksterism to it that is, again, extremely frustrating. But if you can tap into it in the right way, it feels kind of fun. Like we're on this adventure and we don't know why.
And it makes me think what we discussed about linearity and time as well, because uncertainty it's like an awareness of a future that is wildly unknown. And, like, okay, where I am right now might not be where I am tomorrow. And we make so many assumptions, and to function, I think you have to have an element of like, things are going to look similar tomorrow as they do today, or else that wouldn't be good for your kind of mental health if it was too erratic. But there is that element of, like you say, presence and holding uncertainty. As you were talking, so I was thinking, I actually had an image come to mind of the vastness of the unconscious in comparison to what we are conscious of. And I want, because there is a real mystical quality to the unconscious, what Carl Jung would call the collective unconscious. And that operates in a way that is far removed from the traditional way of understanding the rational. We have the non-local elements of synchronicity. We have the mythical surfacing in dreams and symbolism, and the meaning and adventure that comes from that. Even just, oh, I've had like a certain dream. There's a feeling that comes with it, but I can actually go back into that, explore the data, and then learn from the memory of the dream, or from, you could say a memory is probably still present in some way. The reason I bring this up is like, I feel that there's, and Jung obviously had like a lot of conversations with like Wolfgang Pauli and different quantum physicists. That overlap to me seems to be that the unconscious has a lot more relatability with the quantum, and that the rational, or like the intellect and the known and the ego, and in Jung's term of like what we're aware of, has a lot more of the kind of certainty, the way of thinking in certainty and logic. And even though like I think a lot of this stuff is logical when you look at it from a certain view, I think it's logical that the quantum influences our lives. But yeah, that feels like an overlap for me. That's why I feel Jung was such a genius. The overlap between collective unconscious and quantum, and then like what we see and perceive, and the mystery and the dynamic of relating to the unconscious.
Oh, for sure. This is like, it brings me back to this idea we were talking about at the beginning with humans being a bridge. This is actually in many ways what I feel is like one of the sort of divine purposes of the human life, is to be this bridge between this vast collective unconscious that's wild and zany and fascinating and deep and dark, and then bridge that with this physical reality that we all experience.
Yeah.
And both are important. And again, brings us back to this, like going up and out versus down and in. It's not either or. It's a both and thing, where we need to be grounded in this reality. We need to be able to, like you were saying, for our own mental health, be able to think linearly and function in a variety of ways in our day. But then also, can we sometimes tap into this implicate order, collective unconscious, whatever we want to call it, Plato's world of ideas or form? Can we tap into that sometimes and bring that into our bodies and into our daily experience? Can we listen to our dreams, pay attention to synchronicities, pay attention to metaphor and symbolism and mythology, to really fully be that bridge as a human being? I think that's part of the reason why humans exist. It's actually an extremely like unique and beautiful gift, like to be a human. We've been chosen almost to do this in a way, in some sort of way. There's a song, I can't remember the artist right now, but one of the lyrics is something about, you let me know that the universe was made to be seen through my eyes. And this idea of like that's why we're here, is to perceive this and to be the bridge.
Yeah, and to connect to that, again, like the relationship to the divine. I know like Plato and with this quality of beauty, this, I think I mentioned this before we started recording, like this intuition that I've had around beauty before I was reading about Plato, something that was in my mind for a while. Because for me, when I'm in almost like an altered state, and I'm really present and I'm receptive, then I become in awe. And the common theme does appear to be beauty, like whether it's in nature, whether it's just in any experience, there's something, because how do we define beauty? Like it's something that is beyond, like we all know and we all kind of sense it, but we can't really define it as such. And it's almost like, as an essential quality, beauty bridges the physical and the divine. And that kind of sense of knowing is through beauty and through love and through compassion and wisdom. As Plato talks about the idea of like the philosopher king or queen, and how that, as you say, like the integration into the physical, accepting the the mystery of life and almost the responsibility or duty to consciously integrate essential qualities that are, I'll say, godlike. I'm happy to say godlike. But in that, that's such like an area, it's such a responsibility, but also such a joy to be able, we can do it. We can manifest that in our lives. And again, like, I forget all the time, so I'm certainly not an expert at that, but we always have that choice of integrating these qualities.
For sure. Yeah. When you were speaking, it was making me think of, beauty and love. Like, to me, there's some aspect of that's similar. Like the other day I was, in some forgetful state. And then I was staring at a raindrop it was just like one little raindrop that the sun had captured. And there was just this brief moment where I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. And there's a feeling of like love, for lack of a better word, really. But love is often described by mystics as well as and people who've had awakening or spiritual experiences as some feeling that they get, that it feels like love. And I think that, for us to be able to embody these virtues is really a duty in a way, but also an enjoyable one, and a part of being human.
And with this idea of essence as well, it can be contained in the seemingly mundane. Like you're saying, even in a raindrop, kind of like a single raindrop, because I'm looking at, actually, as I look at it now, I've got raindrops on my windows, so it's very apt. But even that, it's almost like talking of scale, like the universe, the whole universe can be contained. Oh God, it's like, is it William Blake? Is it William Blake's poem about the infinity in an hour and in a grain of sand?
Grain of sand. Yes, I think that's who it is.
This poem, something, the universe in an atom. I don't know. I should know how to recite that. It's one of my favorite poems. But it is this idea of like, all of these qualities can saturate a single point if we're receptive enough. It doesn't have to be grandiose, but when we're connected to that, it's almost as if it adjusts to where our attention is, and that loving quality and that embodied experience kind of moves us deeply. I think it's one of the best things about being human, really, to feel that.
Me too. I relish those experiences. They're just amazing. And it's, again, this as above, so below aspect, that you're having this little moment of experience of love and beauty that in some fractal way is resonating above and below and everywhere through you as the bridge. Wow.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way to maybe draw this to a close for night, Bethany. What do you think?
Love and beauty.
Yeah. I mean, in any conversation, if it gets to love and beauty, I'm like, we'll leave it there. We'll let that. No, I really enjoyed this exploration, and I'm aware, like, I think we both share that tendency of being able to explore these ideas, and I feel that for people listening, hopefully there's a lot of value in our exploration. It's given me a lot to think about. And I think the takeaway for me is also this like responsibility that we have that really resonates, like this responsibility to integrate the essential. I'm like, Bethany, should we end the conversation? And I do this all the time. This is common. I do it with my partner a lot. I'm like, oh, should we stop talking now? And then I just start talking again. I'm like, God damn it.
I do the same thing to the point my partner falls asleep. So it's totally fine.
There you go. We're going to end up having a podcast that goes on for like 5 hours. It's fine. But I wanted to bring that, like the idea of love and beauty, and the idea of spirituality. And when I always say, like, I had my awakening, I got into meditation, I read Roger Walsh's book, Essential Spirituality. And, really, it's like, when we think of spirituality, for me, it's about the essential qualities that we've spoken about, including forgiveness, including joy, including compassion, like these qualities that we can have. And it's almost as if our obligation with a spiritual practice is to integrate the essence, and from that essence emerges like a multitude of experiences and interactions. But spirituality really, for me, is like what is essential. what is at the core of being and the core of existence. And this scale, to my understanding, and subjective as well, and it's through my experience, I feel deeply that those qualities that are inherently good, and Plato talks to this, the idea of goodness, they scale up and down when we can see. And that the ultimate, we call the ultimate good, we might call that God, we might call it the divine. But I feel like there is like a transcendental, essential quality that is benevolent and loving and supportive. And we recognize that because it's a part of us as well, as it is a part of the universe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I read something recently about this idea of all we do in our spiritual development is focus on ourselves. Like, I need to better myself. I need to meditate for 15 hours a day. And we don't consider our obligation to the earth, to other people around us, then our spiritual practice is largely lacking. And there's research on this, on models of transformation across cultures, across spiritual traditions. And there almost always is this element of moving from me to we. And we, including the earth, the earth's body, animals, plants, everything. And I agree with you. I think that that's an essential component of a spiritual practice, moving from beauty and love within ourselves to also then compassion and altruism and forgiveness, etc., towards others.
Allow those essential qualities to imbue your actions and the way that you interact, and know that as humans we forget and mess up, but it's our, we just have to try our best to maintain that, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Bethany, thank you so much for returning to the show. Is there anywhere, like, for people listening to direct them to if they want to find out more about your work?
I would say the easiest way would be to go to my website. So it's just my name, bethanybutzer.com. And then also I'm on Instagram and Facebook by my name as well. So I post there sometimes various things about what I'm up to. So I would say those would be the two main places to go to learn more. Awesome.
Well, thank you very much. And I would love for you to come back on the show at some point.
That'd be cool. Absolutely. No, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Ricky. It's been a joy today to see where we end up in this exploration.
I wonder if, looking back on this, we'll see that arc from the beginning, and like watching this back, I wonder, I feel that is the case. And I feel like the intention at the beginning to have this discussion has led to some really interesting points of view.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Bethany.